your Benedict option really is not about confronting so much as withdrawing. At what point do you confront the culture that you rightly so deplore?
See, this is, I think, a common misconception about the Benedict option. I argue that we have to withdraw in a limited way from the world so that when we go out into the world, we are formed as strong, well-discipled Christians so we can transform the world. It's not an either or. I think, for example, that we need to make our homes into domestic monasteries in the sense that we have to keep the media out of our home unrestricted, with smartphones and things like something as simple as that.
Television, you talk in the book about withdrawing from television, keeping the kids off the cell phones, the dangers of pornography and other things. What about the pop culture at large?
All right, welcome to the Magnificast. This is our short episode that we're getting back around to talking about the Benedict option. Today, with Dean and I, we have John Thornton. John is a very intellectual Twitter man who has actually read the Benedict option in its entirety. In case you didn't really know, Dean and I didn't read it before we proceeded to just dunk all over Rod Dreher. So we brought John in as our sort of like expert in the field, Benedict option, PhD candidate here. So John, will you tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get into this?
Sure, yeah. So first thing, not a PhD candidate.
No, you're a PhD in the Benedict option.
Oh, right. Yes, yeah. Oh, no. In my Benedict option community, I am a PhD candidate.
Right.
So right off the bat, I live in a Benedict option community with Tradical and Rachel Held Evans. We all got together and read the book, and we're so convinced by its argument that we actually live in a bunker together.
So you moved from the main floor of Rachel Held Evans' house to the basement just after having read the book.
Yes, yeah, that was the prerequisite to moving in with Rod. Was that we read the book and now we're in, and it's a pretty intense experience. But he has to let me into the doctoral program of the Benedict option. You have to watch the 300 over and over and over again. I don't know why that is part of what it takes to get into the Benedict option, but that's how you get in the community.
Yeah, fair enough.
In all seriousness, I am a Baptist minister living in Greensboro, North Carolina currently, but I'm moving to Winston-Salem in about 3 weeks to begin work there as an associate pastor at First Baptist Winston, and yeah, I read the book, and I read it because he for so long I was a long fan of Rod Dreher's work at the American Conservative.
Like for real or not for real?
I found it very compelling. I always wanted to read it in kind of the same way that you want to watch a sort of mental breakdown on reality TV.
Okay.
It's entertaining. Yeah, it's a very entertaining read. And one of his main criticisms of people who criticized the Benedict option was that they hadn't read the book. So I thought, well, I should read this, and I have a small continuing education budget at the church that I work at, so I used that for.
Well, that's good to know that you didn't spend your own dollar bills on that book is that's encouraging to me.
Right, I still helped him get to the New York Times bestseller list. So I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, so as Matt was saying, we did not read the book, so we fall victim to all the criticisms that Rod has levied against his, invading army of Persian commentators. So being someone who has read the book, what do you think? Did we get it right? Is he everything we said he is, or have we just been brutally uncharitable and we should all be moving into the basement soon enough?
We got so much room in the basement. If you want in, we've got plenty of empty bunk beds down here. But so y'all weren't wrong necessarily. So one of the things with the book that's different than his blog on the American Survey, it is not. He is not as mad in text as he is mad online. He is very mad online and just goes on these long-winded rants. And the book is much more measured in its argument. It's not a good argument, but it at least is one. Whereas the blog is far more reactionary. So the basic argument is that we have entered into a new phase that's been a long time coming. And he never defines we or us when he uses it in the book, but it becomes pretty obvious throughout that it is white Christians in the West, partly because he takes these little exceptions where he speaks about people that are not Christians and particularly that are not white. They're few and far between, but that becomes that. So we have entered this phase of sort of moral disorder or moral incoherence. That's been a long time coming, and so he traces this historically, and Alistair McIntyre is kind of his guy for this. If you've read the book After Virtue, the whole thing is that basically, like, we just don't have the sort of language or habits or common life together that allows us to have a common conception of the good and then live good lives. And so what do you do in the face of this? And he pulls this one particular sentence from the end of Alistair McIntyre's After Virtue, which spells out this whole story, that says we need a very different Saint Benedict. So one thing that's already hilarious is that in an interview recently, Stanley Hauerwas said that Alistair McIntyre confided in him that he regrets that line, that we need to do St. Benedict more than any line he's ever written. And that's before the Benedict option was written.
Now he actually appreciates having written it.
Right, now he sees it. Now he sees it. He actually sees what it became and sees that it's this beautiful, loving, and kind human being in Rod Dreher.
Yeah, so that's really interesting to me because one thing we talked about on the episode was how there are some kind of similarities in tactics between the Benedict option and, say, something like new monasticism. So we tried to characterize it as a left and right version of that. And jumping off of that McIntyre line really, I feel like, fits that bill in a way because both of them take that up as kind of their, I don't know, the problem to which they're trying to be the answers, but in very different ways.
Yes. So yeah, that's sort of the next point. So like so this whole America and the West to become morally incoherent. So how do you know where do you see this? So for someone like Stanley Hauerwas, who is a theologian, professor at Duke Divinity School, for him and I think is a really good reader of Alistair McIntyre, for him, the moral incoherence of America is most on display in America's penchant for war and imperial violence and just the destruction of human life all over the planet. For Rod Dreher, it is in the granting of the rights in the state for same-sex couples to be married.
Yeah, that sounds maybe a little troubling.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Those seem like two very different things. And Dreher doesn't really give an account of why one would be... So, like, in that whole narrative that I just gave of, like, how America sinks into this place of moral incoherence and decay, like, slavery doesn't come up. Like, literally never at all. Not once does the fact that, like, people owned people, like Abu Ghraib, the nuclear bomb, none of these things, and, you know, those are pretty easy examples of that I would think Christians ought to be able to to name as like these are problems.
Right.
They do not come up as problems for Dreher in his and so that's where I think that's a pretty big divergence, right, from the right and left of like responding to what it is that America or the West or however you want to narrate it has become in terms of faithfulness to Jesus. So for Dreher, that is, I mean, the Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage is a watershed moment for him.
So that's it. That's like the big objection for Dreher, but he doesn't really talk about why that's like an objection for him.
So yeah, I think his reasoning is basically that this is the epitome of individual selves get to make decisions.
Okay.
And so this is just right. Yeah, I mean.
That sounds bad. People shouldn't have choice.
Yeah.
Right. And
so,
especially if they're choosing to live lives of faithful monogamy with one another. I mean, we really.
Well, I mean, because it's like inherently gross, I think it's okay to be against. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't come out and ever say that he just thinks it's icky,
Yeah.
and which I would actually just find that to be it's at least a reason. So his reasons biblically and I'm a Baptist, so I'm going to go biblically, but also theologically is essentially boiled down to God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
Yeah. But that's
the back of a car, so that sounds true to me.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've read that from the holy text of the car in front of me during a commute. Yes.
yeah. So it's a little more. I mean, that chapter you'd have a harder time fitting that on the back of the car, but if you boiled it down, that's basically what it would come to. So I think the right-left dichotomy, it's not wrong. And as I was re-listening to that episode, I think y'all were right on that, but that with sort of Shane Claiborne, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, the new monastic movement, there is a way to evaluate. They would claim there's what's wrong morally that they would be responding to, or in terms of faithfulness to Jesus and the call of Jesus. And then they would say we ought to live in communities that embody that, and for them that means that they own less and they give to the poor, and they live amongst the poor. And I think y'all are right in the questioning how that scales or what that looks like in terms of larger political commitments. But at least you could just look at their community and say, well, yeah, they seem to be trying to follow Jesus together, and this is how. So Dreher's solution seems to be, pray more, have more liturgical worship, no gay marriage. That all just sounds like my suburban Christian upbringing in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Yeah.
Yeah. The option part of the Benedict option is like eating at Chick-fil-A with your kids.
Oh my God.
It's like, how do you eat at Chick-fil-A still?
Yeah.
How do you sneak it into the basement? That's my question. Without anybody noticing? That's really, I mean, the network is so easily uncovered.
But I mean, like, would you even want to eat at Chick-fil-A after after the secret police, like, force you to hire, like, the gays or whatever? I don't know if that's, like, if that will still, like, be a desirable thing.
Well, no, we've actually got a Chick-fil-A in the food court.
It's like a strip mall. She lives above a strip mall.
Right, yes.
So it sounds like we characterized Rod Dreher's Benedict option we characterize it as being too radical, or like as being more radical than it is, because it seems like it's absolutely not radical in the least. It seems like white Christianity is normal. Yeah.
So right. So one of the things, like I said, nothing he says in here struck me as very strange. So I grew up in like literally right between Dallas-Fort Worth, mega church culture, went to private Christian school, and everything he said, aside from sort of the liturgical worship, sort of matched my upbringing. I was told that like our college professors would try to turn us into atheists, and I went to Baylor. Baylor University. Way worse things were going on at Baylor, we now know, when I was there, than college professors turning people into atheists. So one of the things I think y'all talked about that was right was that why would the police come for any of these people? Why would they care? If you take the Benedict option to its most extreme, what is the fruit that bears that either resembles Jesus or threatens the existing order?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, that's still kind of how, even after hearing you talk about it and explain it, I still feel like what Rod Dreher is describing is just like homophobic white supremacist Christianity, and like that is exactly the status quo. And I don't see that being a threat to anybody. Like, at least in terms of like Stanley Hauerwas or John Howard Yoder or whatever, like what they want to do is at least like actively questioning empire, and that's not like super radical, but at least a little bit. But Rod Dreher,
it at least lends itself to that. Like,
yeah.
It could. I mean, to refuse to participate in war is in whatever capacity that looks like is, at least more challenging.
Are you saying that telling soldiers to not go to war is more radical than like telling suburban moms not to shop at Target? Because that seems suspicious to me. These seem very very similar degrees of sacrifice, of challenge.
He talks about politics and this kind of new kind of politics, which is a line that Hauerwas also does, which is that basically we need to expand our notion of politics beyond voting and the state. And it's basically saying everything is politics, which seems like it's saying nothing is politics, is another part of his argument. But he says, he's talking about Trump. He says, will Trump govern as a friend to Christian conservatives? Perhaps. If you appoint Supreme Court justices and lower court judges who are enthusiasts for religious liberty, then his administration will have been a blessing to us.
Check mark.
Yeah. Done.
To us. And by that, he means the Magnificast podcast.
Yeah, we're getting federal funding as we speak.
Right. But I do think that us is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so we should talk about that like everything is politics thing, because I kind of feel like that's sort of right. I just think that Rod Dreher has like garbage politics. Or like I would want to say we talked a little bit on the episode about the problem of withdrawal, and Matt, I think it was right to like stand up for withdrawal when I wanted to kind of throw it away as reactionary, but by pointing to somebody like the Zapatistas, right, where like their whole existence is political just by virtue of like existing in a weird kind of way. But yeah, when Rod Dreher says everything is political, but then I don't know, still kind of like defends Paula Deen, like that's a weird political move.
Well, but I think Rod Dreher has no idea what that phrase even means. Everything is political. I mean, he thinks it is exactly like shopping at Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby and like getting down there and like not at all what like it means to be like a person on like the margins of society, to be like a colonized person, right? Like he doesn't understand that type of everything is politics. He just okay. I think everything is political, but yeah, he has bad politics. Right,
and he also likes to differentiate between sort of political power in the state and cultural power, because whenever it's brought up that there's just like a shit ton of Christian like state politicians that are all making these laws, and that only gets more and more as you go to the state level, like the individual state level. He says, well, no, of course we have more Christians or people that claim to be Christians at these levels of power, but like that's not real. I mean, that's not real. They're not winning the cultural war. And so he that's an easy dichotomy for him, because it allows him to switch back and forth, right? Like he can say, oh yeah, so like, of course there are like politicians that are making laws and they're Christians, but overall we're actually losing because of culture And I think what he means by that is just stuff I see online. Stuff I see online that makes me feel like I see Charles Murray not being able to talk to Middlebury University, like a tiny school, it's a totally inconsequential event, right? And that somehow is like more like a bigger deal than like that's infringing upon people's religious liberty more so than these laws that are getting passed by Trump or
that's a very funny diagnosis of him just like equating sort of his online experiences and sort of the bubble he's built for himself with like real life persecution or something. Like Rachel Held Evans is mean to me, therefore Christians are very persecuted.
Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah. How could you not see this? And you know that line that I read about us and the next paragraph and so this like equation of experience like and so the next paragraph, he has this many Hispanics and other Christians of color, as well as all who, for whatever reason, did not vote for the divisive Trump, do not thereby cease to be Christian.
Thanks, Dreher. Appreciate that.
Very ecumenical of him, very opening, very affirming. Yes, good.
Yeah. But I love that line. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
I can't think of one.
I can't.
But if you were to dream one, that you're still in the church, it's okay. Like we won't.
If you were to manufacture if you couldn't see that religious liberty was more important to the families of immigrants than not being deported, so
voting for a very like good family man like Donald Trump. I think, it's not like you're not a Christian if you don't vote for somebody who's been, clearly so cherishing of that societal institution as Donald J. Trump. But it does, I don't know, you should maybe do a double take if that just doesn't immediately scream to you like family values.
Right. I will say he has been, like, I think on his blog, he's been a little more critical of Trump than some evangelicals who just are all in, but because for him he basically like religious liberty laws are his that's God, Trump card. I didn't even mean to. I don't want to make it fun. It's not a joke. It's just
he's not like a Trump supporter or anything, but it's like I don't know, like what you were saying about the culture thing. I think is right. Like there's this weird Foucault line where Foucault says, like the real fascist you should worry about is like the fascist inside, like the fascist in yourself or whatever it is. But if you're Rod Dreher, the real SJW you should worry about is the SJW inside yourself. That seems like very right to me.
I don't know. It's completely humorless too. I mean, he seems Hauerwas is funny, right? Like he's really good at making jokes and certain lines that at least cause a kind of dissonance with what you thought you believed.
Yeah.
And Dreher has none of that. It's
you say that Rod Dreher is humorless is like the least shocking thing I've ever heard.
I mean, he seems. Part of it's like, okay, look, if you're going to take a really strong opinion like he does, you should realize it's going to be funny and like it's going to be made fun of,
right.
And like and then just roll with that.
He does try. He tries really hard on his blog. He did a review of Sam Rocha's review of him, or like a response to Sam Rocha's review, I guess. And he tries very hard to be very funny, but I gotta say, Sam is much funnier, and it makes Rod Dreher look like a sad dad. Very sad, very sad dad.
Sad.
Yeah,
sad dad.
Yeah, bad, sad, red dad.
So it just sort of occurs to me that in like promoting that episode on Twitter, on both my personal Twitter and the Magnificast Twitter, I've always subtweeted him. I've never added Rod Dreher. So maybe I should do that. I don't know. We should we should repost
just to earn the badge.
If we could
get him in on this, yeah. He'll write like he'll write like 5,200 words and then say and the two hosts had not even read the book, so I'm not even mad.
and then like I on Twitter I would say thank you for mentioning us.
You're getting the word out.
Yeah, thank you for that free publicity. I'll say more bad things about you if you also write more bad things about me. I'm totally cool with that. I think that's
great. Well, and Sam's review was really good. I mean, it was. Also, it's not clear that Rod Dreher, and so if Rod, if you're listening, if you catch wind of this via the Twitter accounts that you have not blocked yet that this shows up on, it's not clear that you've read Alistair McIntyre really beyond one sentence, but certainly beyond After Virtue, because it's not like if this book were to come across Rod Dreher or Alistair McIntyre's desk, he'd be like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." I hadn't thought about liturgical worship.
And Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I thought about just like eating a Chick-fil-A. I would lose my mind if I saw Alistair McIntyre at Chick-fil-A. But yeah, it's not like Alistair McIntyre hadn't thought about the idea of strategic retreat. So okay, this is the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about, is that like is his sort of upshot to what to do. Like I said, it's lame, and you wouldn't really recognize it. Like it would blend right in with a sort of capitalist society.
Yeah.
Like it would make total sense, right? Like pray more, do more work. It would actually create more markets. So my favorite line my favorite part of the book where I laughed out loud. So his upshot is do like more liturgical worship, pray more, send your kids to private Christian school. He does have a nice little caveat in that part where he says, "I know private schools have a history of being used for racial segregation." But they shouldn't be anymore. Like, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, they shouldn't. You're right. But
you put it that way.
Stay woke, Rod Dreher.
Yeah, stay woke. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's so weird. Like, so I teach at a private Christian college, and I think that tension is something I have to like really deal with. Is that where like I'm inheriting and like working here and like teaching kids here, kind of like a troubled past. Not necessarily my school, but like other schools like mine. Rod Dreher does not make me feel any better about it though, and like promoting it. So maybe he should stop. I would appreciate that. But also like I don't know. I think that private Christian colleges are not sort of like or private Christian schools in general probably aren't the utopic spaces that Rod Dreher thinks they are. They're pretty different.
Right, yeah, he does kind of he does recognize. I mean, he says homeschool. He doesn't say for college, but he does say homeschool. Yeah, so he recognizes that schools, just in general, like are bound up in all of the machinations of all that he thinks is wrong with the world. But I mean, I'm with you. Like, I went to Baylor University. I am who I am today because of going to Baylor University. I studied religion there. Had a couple. Jonathan Tran, who was a religion professor of mine and a student of Stanley Hauerwas's, told me to go to Duke Divinity, and is like how, is where I am today. So those things aren't.
Yeah. Well,
bad.
If he's advocating for homeschool, then we're full in Jacques Ellul territory, sort of cows on the hill kind of situation.
Full Ellul.
Full Ellul, yeah, here we go.
Okay, so maybe can we ask, like, John, is there, if we can close up by asking, is there one thing that our review maybe, like, got super right, and then one thing our review got extra right?
You got it so right. So I think this is the thing that I appreciate about Rod Dreher, and I appreciate it particularly about his blog, is the persecution complex. I think is really interesting because it's not. He totally recognizes, look, the police are not coming to knock on my door. And one of the things you guys talked about was, like, if you really think this is going to lead to getting people killed, publishing a book about it and like putting it, like, you would go as far off the grid as you could, and that what your Christian convictions are telling you to do is to preserve a certain way of life. You would want to get that way of life as far away from the state from like the state, from other people. You would go, like, you would get off the grid. So he doesn't have a fear right now that anybody's gonna like. He's like hanging out at a cocktail party. He's a New York Times bestseller. Like he's crushing it. And so what he does have, though, is this fear of future persecution with very thin justification for it. And actually, in that, the thing about Rachel Held Evans, right, is he said, and I was listening to like an hour and a half ago when I was driving home, is when you were reading, he says, my fear is that somewhere in the far distant future, the police will come. And not only is that crazy and like not founded on any sort of reality, but then that informs his support for the state and state violence today. Mm-hmm. And particularly as it's enacted against minority populations.
Yeah.
So, like, I think Rod Dreher's biggest fear is that he looks at America and sees the way that America treats minority populations and people in minority positions, and then looks at some surveys, looks at kind of gut intuition, and thinks, "Oh, Christians will be that one day."
It's like,
and this will happen to us.
It's like the most like eye-rollingly stupid backwards reading of like Jean Rawls' sort of like veil of ignorance. Like someday Christians could be on the other side of this this hegemony, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen, or something like that.
It's actually like, now that you're saying all this, so you know, George Chicoreo, Mar, or however you say his name. I'm really sorry, George. Of course, you're not listening to this, but if you were, I hope you would accept this apology. Anyway, so, you know, he's like back in the news because of all this tweet he did about white genocide. And like, Rod Dreher sounds like he has that exact worry, right? That, I don't know, his kind of way of life is slowly being dismantled by people like marrying people of different races and, I don't know, going to different churches and like just being nice to one another or something.
Yeah, that like Roger's fear is that like somewhere in the future he would tweet, marriage should be between a man and a woman, and that like you know, he would get fired from his job or something, and that's just so far from the from the reality. But that is his fear. I mean, he talks about Christians who agree with him on marriage. I mean, that's what sucks, is like, dude, at least have some interesting commitments, like, you know, I mean,
in fairness, like, I would fire him.
Yeah, I'd fire him for writing these sloppy long blog posts, but like, you know, he doesn't have any, and he doesn't justify it in terms of scripture, in terms of his church, or orthodoxy is just kind of this free floating thing. But yeah, he has this genuine fear that the tables are going to turn. And so, like, you would think a faithful Christian witness would be to look at what America does to minority populations as the largest empire in the world, and then say, for those of us who might have benefits from that empire, our job or our goal, our witness, ought to be to stand against that, not worry that it might turn against us.
Right.
And that's what's so just disappointing. It's like, yeah, you see that like America does these awful things to people, and that the state, and on a very like real level with people, the police do these things to people. And I mean, yeah, reading his blog about the police is just, it's gross. And so, but his worry is basically that you would take like unjustified police violence, police murder videos on YouTube, and that instead of black people, it would be Orthodox Christians.
Right. Yeah. But that's like the most like ridiculous thing to me. Those like visualizations of violence on TV, like they must influence him to some extent, so that he like that future fear of police violence against like Orthodox Christians or something is in his mind, right? So he knows that like violence against people by like repressive apparatuses are real, but the most like troubling thing is he's like, yeah, and like good, it should just stay the way that it is, and like those should never be turned on us. It's just like
Right, yeah.
instead of like committing to like dismantle those apparatuses altogether and like, yeah, repressive violence is bad, he's like, no, it's only bad when it's not me and only the right people getting punched in the face and like pepper sprayed. That's good, but when it's us, no, not good.
One thing like that I think is missing from both like the right and the left reaction to the evils of America and capitalism, however you want to describe them, is particularly from Christians, is a sense of what a better sort of vision or system would look like beyond the very, very local.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have that, capital will always find a way to atomize oppression. At the end of the day, you're going to have to think about yourself, or those close to you. You're gonna have to protect the family, like Dreher says. And so that was the thing that I kind of wanted to bring up, was like with the Rutba House and the Shane Claiborne and John Holzhauer, was like. And one of the reasons I like y'all's podcast and I like what I'm seeing developing on the left is some sort of vision for what something like systemic justice would look like, and that's what I think we need to remedy whatever this Benedict option is, or the fear that brings it about. It's just a bad book. We gotta it's just not. It's a bad book. It's a bad idea. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think it's something we've got to start articulating in fuller, broader ways. And it can't be born out of fear. And yeah, I'm ready to be done with this freaking book.
Yeah,
so
nice.
bad.
Good. Well, all right, everybody listening out there, you guys heard it here first. Christians ought to demand systemic justice, and specifically seizing the means of production, smashing white supremacy, and dismantling the patriarchy. All right, thanks, guys. That's been the Magnificast. See you later.
Amen.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up.